Babushka had 3 sons and 8 grandsons working in the local metallurgical factory, but nobody thought to build her a teapot. If you have to make these comparisons, not a single one of those comparisons actually had to do with GDP per capita, which is a better way to calculate individual living standards. And none of it took into consideration comparative levels of education or comparative living standards as we calculate that currently. Right? It's very easy to take a country like the Soviet Union, which just basically spent all of their money on military and heavy industry, and say they have a large GDP because you're building a bunch of very expensive military factories, but that doesn't really do anything for the people. All right, like in the instance of my home country in Romania. All right, the Soviet Union came in and they gave us a lot of T-57 factories, built a lot of tanks for them. Babushka had 3 sons and 8 grandsons working in the local metallurgical factory, but nobody thought to build her a teapot. That doesn't speak to the relative living standards or the availability of commercial goods, for instance. That would be an interesting comparison. Now, I would like you to answer this question for me. Do you actually know the countries that are being compared to each other, and can you list some of those comparisons?
I mean, I can bring up the comparisons right now. I have the study in front of me, but I'm going to have to scroll down.
So that's a no.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't reference them at this exact time. I just have a list of countries by, socialist, capitalist. I mean, I have charts in front of me, but they're not named off.
They don't have any names. So your study, this killer study, is saying that if you compare relative economies, that the socialist ones tend to have less people in the countryside and have a similar rate of usage of electricity. That's speaking to nothing that I would care about.
Well, just because I can't reference the names of it, because
it's not just that. It's just the things you told me you were comparing are not speaking to living standard. They're speaking to GDP, which does not take into consideration the individual living standards. It doesn't take into consideration education. And it takes into consideration things like people living out in the countryside.
Yeah, let them respond, Cheshire.
Hold. My God. What I'm saying is they do actually factor these into comparison, from child death rate, infant mortality, life expectancy, population per physician, population per nursing person, daily per capita calorie supply, adult literacy, secondary education, higher education, and then general PQL. I have the study right here. I will once again link in the private chat. But long story short, once again, I mean, none of this disproves my point. Nothing. All you're doing right now is coping, dude. You're just trying to compensate for the fact that this study is clearly showing countries of similar economic parity and the socialist countries in the majority of comparisons beating out their capitalist counterparts. The majority.
Well, we don't know that because you can't tell me what countries that are actually being compared to. You can't give me a single name. The study is.
All right, you want some comparisons? How about Egypt compared to Azerbaijan, or
wait, what? These are the countries that are being compared.
So
what country is
Iran and Turkey, Egypt compared to like Azerbaijan, Georgia, and what's the name of the other one? The point is that even when compared to their
they picked all of the
countries,
most impoverished countries possible to do the study. Apparently,
what are some more of the Central Asia? Soviet Central Asia was relatively poor as well, and once again.
Well, yeah. So you're picking all of these incredibly impoverished countries, so they have relatively similar stats.
So let me explain why. I mean, I know you're just going to keep denying it because that's all you can do.
I'm not denying it.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why socialism provides better living standards. This is for the audience. When you are not subsidizing the development or the existence of a giant, like a super wealthy class of private oligarchs that are hoarding and basically taking most of the wealth out of circulation, when you're blowing resources on planned obsolescence, rents, dividends, stock buybacks, as well as these other relatively mundane, stupid shit that doesn't benefit people in the real world at all, when you take the money that would otherwise, and the resources that would otherwise be spent doing this shit for the sake of generating profits in the abstract and actually dedicate it towards reinvestment and taking care of your people, you have a lot of resources that are freed up for providing people with a better quality of life as well as for economic expansion. So that's the reason why. There's other reasons too. But
all right, so if I can cut in here. So the problem with this study And I don't exactly know how comparable Azerbaijan would be to Egypt, considering that maybe through a lot of the periods they're studying, Egypt was kind of in a big war. There was the Suez Crisis. There was multiple religious civil wars going on in the period. So that's weird. I would also like to see what time period they're being compared for. But what this study is essentially doing is they're finding a bunch of mostly pre-industrial societies and saying that the socialist ones get more benefits from a larger totalitarian industrial regime, which wants them to build more weapons for them. So therefore, they have a higher GDP, right?
Not true.
Let me finish, because you keep bitching every time I interrupt you, right? So
I keep stopping you before you can run and make several points.
No, Trav, he's right. You got to let him finish.
Yeah, let him finish his point, and then it'll go back to you.
Points. Go ahead.
All right. When you compare more developed economies, the difference grows. For instance, it's weird that the Soviet Union, one of the strongest economies there, one of the largest economies on the planet, its population still had on average, a much lower living standards than smaller capitalist economies in the West. For instance, comparing the economic strength between Canada and the Soviet Union would be laughable. But Canadians had a better living standards throughout the Cold War. Comparing, for instance, even smaller nations like Belgium, Luxembourg, trying to think of other tiny. The Netherlands is a smaller country. Even the Netherlands, after they gave up all of their imperial zones, when they had a smaller economy than the Soviet Union, they still had a better living standard. And this is the problem that every socialist country faces. It has a large economy. It does grow relatively fast, even though it's not really the fastest. There are other countries that grow faster. But even with all of this great industrial strength, they still fail at distributing that to the people. It is funny because you're doing it with a centralized system, and the supposedly irrational, evil system of capitalism somehow able to better distribute their resources to their workers than a centrally planned system like the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I don't know if letting 1% of the population hoard 40% of the wealth is a more efficient allocation of resources, but there are actually models in both theory and in practice that they didn't care exclusively about heavy industry. They actually did do things on the consumer end to provide a better quality of life. So I'm going to go ahead and reference a text. If I can find quality of life. I've got farm to factory in front of me, but it showcases that they did actually factor in.
What is farm to factory?
Farm to factory, a reinterpretation of the Soviet Industrial Revolution. I forget the name of the author, but
can you please tell me the name of that author? Because I think he's a socialist, and I think he's a bootlicker.